Welcome to This Explainer. Right now, we are metaphorically standing in the magnificent galleries of the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, getting ready to witness a massive threshold in human consciousness. We aren't just looking at changing styles of paint on wood or canvas here. Today, we're going to unpack the most dramatic psychological and visual revolution in Western history.
Let's just dive right into this massive juxtaposition. We're tracking the agonizing but ultimately beautiful transition from a rigid, weightless medieval mindset, a flattened world completely obsessed with the divine, to a mathematically precise, dynamic, 3D, and unapologetically human-centric explosion of reality that we now call the Renaissance.
To help us unpack this seismic shift, the source material breaks things down into 4 acts. Act 1, the divine realm. Act 2, fracturing faith. Act 3, the secular flex. Act 4, the magic of perspective. And finally, we'll wrap up with the true cycle of rebirth.
Okay, starting with Act 1, the divine realm and the deliberate rejection of physical reality in the 11th to 13th centuries.
So we begin our story in a state of stasis. If you look at art from the Romanesque and early Gothic periods, the figures are, well, they're incredibly flat, elongated, totally weightless. You might be wondering why paint like that? Well, to the medieval mind, physical reality wasn't something to be celebrated. The physical world was basically just a painful, transient waiting room. The only reality that actually mattered was the spiritual realm and the afterlife. Because of this, art was never meant to mirror the visible world. Instead, it functioned as a 2D visual textbook, a biblia pauperum, designed specifically to educate a congregation that largely couldn't read.
And you can see this perfectly through something called hieratic scale. This is a visual system where a figure's size is based entirely on their divine importance, not on actual physical depth. So Christ or the Virgin Mary, they're painted as absolute giants right in the center. Meanwhile, ordinary humans are relegated to the edges as these tiny, marginalized little figures. It was an entirely two-dimensional universe, completely stripped of human agency. You were basically a tiny ant, and the divine was massive.
Which brings us to Act 2, the Black Death, the catastrophic pandemic, and the fracturing of faith.
Between the years 1347 and 1351, that rigid, stable world literally collapsed. 1/3. That is the terrifying fraction of the entire European population that was completely annihilated by the Black Death. It's a scale of death that is honestly almost impossible for us to fully wrap our heads around today. Naturally, in this apocalyptic hellscape, terrified populations flooded the churches, but the heavens remained silent. When the most devout clergy, the supposed conduits to God, perished just as horribly as the poorest peasants, it caused a massive psychological earthquake across the continent. People started asking, has God abandoned us? Can the church actually save us? Now, they didn't abandon their faith entirely, but that blind reliance on the church as an infallible institution, that was permanently shattered. Instead, a new, urgent secular pragmatism took root. It was very much a, we might die tomorrow, so we have to find value in the earthly moments of today kind of mindset.
Moving right along to Act 3, the rise of the guilds. This is all about secular wealth and the ultimate Renaissance flex.
So surviving the plague permanently changed the economic landscape. The surviving populations inherited highly concentrated wealth, kicking off a new era of secular power driven by powerful artisan associations called guilds. These newly wealthy merchants decided, we aren't just handing over alms to the church anymore. They bypassed the clergy entirely and hired the greatest masters directly, and they demanded the absolute best materials. Take the Virgin Mary's robes, for example. Patrons demanded a pigment called ultramarine. To get this, you had to mine lapis lazuli exclusively in the remote Sari-Sang mines of Afghanistan, transport it across incredibly treacherous Silk Road routes, and then finally get it to Venice to be ground into that brilliant blue paint.
By the time we hit the high Renaissance in the early 1500s, think Leonardo and Raphael, this ultramarine blue was literally more expensive than gold, and for these patrons, cost was absolutely no object. Pounding out astonishingly thin gold leaf and slathering on vast amounts of lapis lazuli wasn't just about being pious, it was the ultimate Renaissance flex. It was worldly power embedded permanently right into a sacred image.
With all this immense wealth fueling a completely new artistic engine, we arrive at Act 4, the magic of the vanishing point, and bringing the cultural gaze down from the heavens to the earth.
This massive shift in focus birthed an entirely new philosophical paradigm called humanism. It's this radical belief that mankind is a beautiful, rational creation of God, which means the physical world is actually worthy of intense scientific study. Because of this, God and the saints weren't painted as terrifying abstract icons anymore. They were suddenly being painted in the idealized, meaty anatomical image of real human beings.
And the magic trick that made this visual revolution possible? Linear perspective. Codified by the architect Filippo Brunelleschi in 1415. The way it works is brilliant. Step 1, establish a single mathematical vanishing point on the horizon. Step 2, converge all receding orthogonal lines toward that single point. And step 3, literally burst that flat, impenetrable 2D medieval wall wide open into a 3D window. Suddenly, figures had actual anatomical mass, and they moved dynamically in a rational, mathematically precise environment. Fun fact, this is actually the exact same foundational math that powers modern 3D video games today. How cool is that?
Finally, let's look at the cycle of rebirth and ask, what does Renaissance actually mean? We throw the word Renaissance around a lot, and we all know it translates to rebirth. But here is the crucial thing to understand. It wasn't just the birth of something entirely new out of thin air. It was a deliberate, ideological return to a foundational standard. The artists of the 15th and 16th centuries looked right past the Dark Ages and backward to the 5th century BCE, the classical Greek standard, reviving those ancient mathematical proportions. This cyclical mechanism happens whenever a culture desperately seeks legitimacy or clarity. In the 1st century BCE, the Augustan revival legitimized a new Roman Empire, using propaganda via copies of Greek bronzes. Fast forward past the Renaissance to the late 18th century, and neoclassicism resurrects the stern severity of the Roman Republic as a visual revolt against decadent Rococo art, literally helping to inspire the French Revolution.
So the Renaissance isn't just a specific century, it's an eternal human impulse. When we look back at the agonizing despair of the plague, and we watch it transform into unprecedented wealth, scientific curiosity, and the reclaiming of human dignity, we see that art is the ultimate visual diary of human triumph. Ultimately, the history of art is the story of how we learn to see ourselves. Which brings us to the present moment. If returning to a past standard to find our footing is this eternal human impulse, a mechanism we trigger whenever we need to propel society forward, what historical standard will our modern world choose to rebirth next? I'll leave you with that provocative thought to ponder, as you consider how our own era might eventually reflect its values onto the canvas of the future. Thanks for joining this explainer.